In May 1956, the peaceful market town of Ormskirk in Lancashire, England, was rocked by a shocking crime. Two elderly sisters, well-known local shopkeepers, were found brutally bludgeoned to death in their own home. Despite a massive investigation, even fingerprinting every local man in the area, the killer was never identified. Nearly 70 years later, the murder of Margaret and Mary Ormesher remains one of Britain's most notorious unsolved cases, often remembered as the Sweet Shop Murders. This video will recount the full story of the Ormesher Sisters, who they were, what happened on that fateful night, and how the mystery endures. Margaret Jane Ormesher, 68, and her younger sister Mary Ormesher, 67, were lifelong residents of Ormskirk. By the 1950s, the two unmarried sisters were beloved fixtures of the community, harmless and helpful spinsters under 5 feet tall. They ran a small tobacconist and sweet shop at 24 Church Street, where Mary, affectionately known as Auntie Polly, tended the counter daily. Margaret was the homemaker. She kept their house in order and was an excellent baker, known for her lovely cakes and pies. The sisters were gentle souls, well liked by neighbours and customers alike, the very image of kindly little old ladies. The Ormesher family had deep roots in the town. Their late parents, Edward and Emma, once operated the Brickmakers Arms pub on Asmall Lane, the very building that later became the sisters' home. Mary and Margaret had two other sisters named Ellen and May, but by the 1950s the two of them lived alone together. They shared their home with a devoted pet, a black spaniel named Trixie, who was known to bark noisily at visitors, acting as a bit of a guard dog. By all accounts, Margaret, or Maggie, was the kind of home-loving sister, while Mary, Polly, was the outgoing shopkeeper, always ready with a smile for her customers. Neither sister had any known enemies, and their gentle, charitable nature made the ensuing crime all the more baffling and heartbreaking. One notable aspect of the sisters' routine was how they handled their shop's cash. The Ormeshers typically carried the week's earnings home in a bag each night, as Mary did not trust banks. This habit was well known around town. In fact, Mary normally had an escort for her walk home. For almost 6 years, their tenant and friend, Mrs. Josephine Whitehouse, who lived above the shop, walked Mary home every single night for safety. Mrs. Whitehouse would accompany Mary to the front of their house, named Ivy Dean, because Mary did not carry a house key. Margaret would open the door from inside once they arrived. The sisters also kept their back door always locked, though Mary confided that Margaret had a bad habit of unbolting the back door if she heard a strange noise outside. This cautious routine shows that the sisters were aware of the potential danger in carrying the cash, and they took precautions, until one tragic night when circumstances broke their usual security pattern. Saturday, May 5th, 1956 started out unremarkably. That day, Mrs. Whitehouse and her husband were out of town that day on a trip to Southport, meaning Mary would have to close shop alone. For the first time in almost 6 years, Mary Ormesher walked home unaccompanied that night. She padlocked the shop in the evening and set off towards Asmall, carrying her brown attached case containing the week's takings, about £150 in cash, which was a substantial amount of money in 1956. It was just a short walk, roughly 15 minutes through a dimly lit streets. Sunset was 8:49 p.m. that spring evening, so by the time Mary left after 10 p.m, it was pretty dark, lit only by a few gas street lamps. Several neighbours later reported seeing or hearing things that in hindsight were quite ominous. At 6:45 p.m, a neighbour, John Wright, saw Margaret Ormesher earlier in the evening entering their home, Ivy Dean, wearing her coat and hat, but nothing seemed amiss. This indicates Margaret was home that night, likely waiting for Mary. Sometime between 10:10 and 10:25 p.m, an elderly neighbour on Unsolved Lane saw Mary walking by on her way home, carrying the brown attached case in her right hand. Mary was also seen carrying an unidentified object in her left hand, though it's unclear what that was. Importantly, no one reported seeing her being followed. 10:18 p.m, a resident returning to Brickmakers Arms yard noticed an unfamiliar man standing across the road from the yard entrance. This man was never identified, and his presence would only seem significant later. One boy later described seeing a mysterious figure on a bicycle on Asmall Lane on multiple nights that week. A man about 5 feet tall with high cheekbones, long dark hair and light-coloured overcoat. It's not confirmed if it was the same person spotted that Saturday night, but it's raised suspicions that someone might have been watching the Ormesher house in the days leading up to the murder. Between 11:15 and 11:30 p.m, several neighbours in cottages surrounding Brickmakers Arms, behind the Ormesher house, reported later that they heard strange noises during the period. The sounds included groans, shouts, both male and female voices, breaking glass and a clatter of metal bins. One neighbour recalled hearing what sounded like someone in distress, but those who heard it brushed it off at the time, assuming it might have been some drunken mischief or a domestic argument nearby. Unfortunately, nobody investigated the noises that night, and in hindsight, those sounds were very likely the attack on the sisters in progress. Inside Ivy Dean, sometime around midnight, a violent struggle was indeed taking place. The exact sequence of events will never be fully known, but forensic and witness clues allow some reconstruction. Mary arrived home by 10:20 p.m, and at some point not long after, one or more attackers gained entry to the house, possibly by knocking on the back door, which Margaret might have opened, or by forcing their way in. The motive appeared to be robbery, given that Mary had a week's shop earnings with her, but whoever came for the money did so with horrifying brutality. The next morning, Sunday, May 6, 1956, Ormskirk began to awaken to unsettling news. Early that morning, customers noticed the Ormesher Sisters' sweet shop was closed on what would have been a normal Sunday business day. This was immediately unusual. Mary opened the shop daily, even on Sundays, like clockwork. By 10:30 a.m, Mrs. Josephine Whitehouse, the sisters' friend and nightly escort, grew concerned when she brought over a cup of tea and found the shop still locked up. Alarmed, Mrs. Whitehouse walked to the Ormeshers' home on Asmall Lane. She knocked on their front door and got no answer. Mrs. Whitehouse enlisted a neighbour, Mr. Tom Cummings of 6 Asmall Lane, to help. Together, they went around to the backyard of Ivy Dean, entering through the passage into the Brickmaker's Arms yard. Immediately, signs of horror met their eyes. Mrs. Whitehouse saw blood on the ground by the back door and let out a scream. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Tom Cummings pushed open the back door, which was unlocked or had been broken into, and stepped inside. What Tom saw inside the kitchen was nothing short of a nightmare. Both sisters lay on the floor in pools of blood, brutally beaten and clearly lifeless. He turned back and urged Mrs. Whitehouse, "You go back," not wanting her to see the grisly scene. After a quick look to confirm the worst, Cummings ran to contact the police, saying gravely, "They're past aid, it's a police case." Inside that small kitchen, a scene of violent struggle was evident. The sisters' bodies were found in their everyday clothes, be that skirts, cardigans and jumpers, indicating the attack had happened before they retired for bed. Blood was splattered across the walls and even the ceiling of the kitchen, and had also sprayed onto the stack of old astrology magazines that the sisters kept, a testament to the frenzy of the blows. Furniture and objects were knocked askew, the kitchen's back door glass pane was shattered, and shards lay about, likely from the wine bottle used in the attack. The dustbin was overturned, and the normally tidy yard was of disarray. It appeared the struggle even spilled into the backyard at one point, because later accounts noted that Margaret's body had been dragged back inside after being beaten outside. Tom Cummings later described the grim discovery to the press in vivid detail. There were 2 bottles of milk on the doorstep, and the rest of the yard was in a state of disorder. Blood was splattered on the walls, the dustbin had overturned, and pieces of broken bottle were strewn about. I pushed the back door open about a foot and saw Polly inside the door. There was blood everywhere. I dashed to the police. Also found in the kitchen, cowering under the table, was the sisters' little dog Trixie. The poor spaniel had not escaped the violence. She had been struck a heavy blow to the head and was badly injured. The terrifying dog limped out of the house behind a neighbour, surviving just long enough to be found, though she would later succumb to her injuries. One relative later lamented, if only the one witness, Trixie, the little dog, could have talked. Police soon swarmed the scene. The murder weapons were identified, strewn around the blood-soaked kitchen, which included a large brass kitchen poker, bent with its heavy head broken off from the force of being used as a bludgeon. 2 solid brass candlesticks, also smashed and their base broken. And a wine bottle, shattered into pieces. Initial reports say wine bottle, the one account mentioned a wine glass, likely the bottle's neck or fragments. These were ordinary objects from the sisters' own home, now turned against them. The attacker had clearly grabbed whatever heavy items were at hand to beat the women mercilessly. Amidst the carnage, the motive became apparent: robbery. Mary's brown attache case, in which she carried the shop takings, was found on the kitchen table, opened. Inside, one of the 2 canvas money bags was missing. Approximately £100 in cash had been taken, roughly a week's earnings, while about £50 in small silver coins was left behind in another bag. In addition, the sisters' purse and some jewellery were reported missing from the house. It seems the killer expected a far bigger haul. There were rumours around town that the Ormesher sisters kept large life savings hidden at the home from years of running their shop. In reality, the sisters did not have a fortune stashed away. Police found only small sums of money tucked in various places, and the house had not been ransacked in any thorough way. The thief essentially killed for just £100 and a few valuables. Chillingly, the only forensic clue left behind was a single bloody fingerprint smeared on one of the surfaces. This fingerprint did not match either sister, so it likely belonged to the perpetrator. At the time, however, its evidentiary value was limited to manual comparison. DNA analysis was decades away, and fingerprint databases were rudimentary. Nonetheless, the lone bloody print would soon set off one of the most extensive manhunts Lancashire had ever seen. The double murder of Mary and Margaret Ormesher triggered a massive police investigation, unprecedented for the area. Chief Superintendent Cecil Lindsay, one of the Northwest's top detectives, with a then unbroken record of solving 50-plus homicide cases, took personal charge of this case. The full resources of the Lancashire Constabulary were thrown into the hunt for the killer. What made the case so shocking was not only the brutality of the crime, but the apparent lack of a clear suspect. This was a small town where the victims were well liked and seemingly had no enemies. Investigators had to consider anyone who might have known about the sisters' money habits or harboured ill intent. Detectives fanned out across Ormskirk, going door to door in pairs to interview residents. They asked if anyone had seen Mary on her walk home, if anyone was observed following her, or if any strangers had been spotted in town around that weekend. Every scrap of information about the unusual movements or suspicious individuals was collected. Given the reports, police considered that the unidentified man on Asmall Lane with a bicycle could be a prime suspect. Someone perhaps from out of town, the bicycle suggested mobility, who might have stalked Mary. They publicised the description given by an 11-year-old witness, 5 feet tall, long dark hair over forehead, light trench coat, new-looking light blue bicycle. But no one came forward to identify this person. Evidence technicians combed through Ivy Dean. They carefully dusted for fingerprints throughout the house, hoping to find a match to the single bloody print or any other prints out of place. Unfortunately, aside from the bloody fingerprint, there were no other fingerprints that clearly pointed to a stranger. The sisters likely kept a tidy home, and any common visitor prints were hard to distinguish. A drop of what looked like blood was found on the footpath near the house, raising hopes it might be the killers. Perhaps they cut themselves during the attack or on broken glass. However, upon testing, that sample turned out to not be blood at all, but mud. Another dead end. With the bloody fingerprint as the best clue, police undertook an extraordinary measure. They decided to fingerprint every male adult in Ormskirk and the surrounding districts to find a match. Starting for about a week after the murders, they kept up a systematic canvass. Over 1,000 men had voluntarily given fingerprints within the first few weeks, all compared against the crime scene's print, but none matched. The effort expanded to fingerprint every male over 16 who had been in the area on the murder weekend. Local newspapers reported on lines of men at the town drill hall waiting to be fingerprinted. This was an enormous undertaking in 1956, reflecting on how desperate the police were to crack the case. Yet, incredibly, after checking thousands of prints, no match was found. This fueled a disturbing possibility. The murderer might not be in the fingerprint pool. Perhaps the killer was a woman, since only men were being tested, or a male under 16, or an outsider who fled. The notion of a female assailant was considered because of the exhaustive fingerprint sweep of men. Could a woman have overpowered both sisters? Some thought unlikely, given the sheer ferocity required, but it couldn't be ruled out. More commonly, investigators leaned towards a young male theory, maybe a teenager not fingerprinted, or a physically strong man who somehow avoided the dragnet. Police deduced a few key things from the scene. For one, the sisters likely knew or trusted their attacker enough to let them get close. The fact that Margaret's habit was to open the back door if someone knocked meant the killer may have simply knocked and been let in, rather than breaking and entering. Notably, no large amount of money was found in the house beyond the stolen £100, undermining the rumour that the fortune was hidden on site. This suggested the killer came expecting more, possibly based on town gossip that the Ormeshers were wealthy moneylenders, a claim that the police disproved as they had made only small friendly loans in the past. Another insight: whoever attacked the sisters would have been bloodied themselves. The struggle was so violent that the assailant likely got the victim's blood on their clothes or body. Indeed, there were rumours of a district nurse treating a man with suspicious injuries in a nearby village in Halsall on the very night of the murder. Police investigated that lead but apparently never found the individual, or it did not yield solid evidence. Initially, everyone who knew the sisters came under scrutiny. Police interviewed their relatives, neighbours, and anyone who might have had knowledge of their routines. Tragically, suspicion even fell on family members. A cousin named Norman Light became a person of interest. Norman was a bit of a drifter who occasionally visited the sisters. Investigators theorised that if the sisters willingly opened the door late that night, it could have been to someone they recognised, perhaps Norman. On the day of the sisters' funeral, local newspapers even announced that the police were seeking a man named Norman Light for questioning. This cast a cloud over the mourning process. Ultimately, Norman Light was located and cleared of any involvement. A cousin, June Bibby, later recalled that Norman was innocent. He used to visit them. They thought it could have possibly been him, but I think they spent a lot of time looking for him and lost the trail, personally. The focus on Norman might have cost valuable time early in the case, as police later had to concede that they were back to square one. Aside from Norman, no arrests were ever made. Local gossip pointed fingers in all directions, but nothing actionable emerged. One persistent local rumour was that the gravedigger at the parish church might have been involved. Purely speculative talk that he must have known something, since he later tended the grave. There was zero evidence behind this, and it also highlights how, in the absence of answers, small-town rumour mills churned out theories. As one resident noted, whoever you spoke to, they all know who it was, but they really didn't. The profile of the crime suggested a robbery gone horribly wrong. Perhaps the attacker confronted Mary first, as she had the money bag, and Margaret intervened and defended her sister, resulting in a chaotic fight. The sisters were petite, in their 60s, yet clearly fought ferociously for their lives, so much so that police believe the attacker may have been injured by the sisters in the struggle. It was reported that whoever committed the murders will have left with some serious wounds which would have needed medical attention due to the desperate resistance the sisters put up. This aligns with the idea of a nurse possibly treating a mysteriously injured man that night. Unfortunately, if that man existed, he was never identified publicly. By the end of 1956, despite exhaustive work, Chief Superintendent Lindsay's team had not found the killer. Lindsay, the super sleuth, saw his perfect record broken by the Ormesher case. Every lead had fizzled, the fingerprint unmatched, the stolen money spent or hidden, and no eyewitnesses to the crime itself. The Ormesher murder investigation became a cold case, though never officially closed. For decades, the case lingered in the files of Lancashire's constabulary, occasionally revisited but never solved. There have been a few flickers of hope, notably one weekend in February 1983, nearly 27 years after the murders, an unexpected tip surfaced. An anonymous elderly man phoned in a newspaper in Manchester claiming he knew the identity of the Ormesher Sisters' murderer. He said that he had withheld this information for many years and expressed regret for not coming forward sooner. The newspaper relayed the tip to Lancashire's Police Criminal Investigation Department. Detectives did follow up and investigate the named suspect quietly. For a time, there was renewed optimism. Had someone's guilty conscience finally cracked? However, the lead did not lead to any arrest or breakthrough, and authorities never publicly revealed the suspect's name or what evidence was discussed. Some speculate the suspect might have already died by 1983, or the information provided was too flimsy or unverifiable by that point. Ultimately, the 1983 tip-off went cold as well, leaving the case no closer to any resolution. In the years since, there have been no significant new leads announced. The case remained officially open. As of 2015, the Ormesher double murder was noted as one of the 15 unsolved murders under active review by Lancashire Police. Modern investigative techniques like checking the bloody fingerprint against national databases or even attempting DNA extraction from preserved evidence have likely been attempted or considered. So far, however, the case is one piece of hard evidence that fingerprint has not matched any known person in any criminal records. The Ormesher murders continue to haunt Ormskirk's collective memory. It stands as the town's most infamous unsolved crime. For perspective, Ormskirk is not a place associated with violent crime. It's a small community better known for its historic markets and gingerbread. In nearly 70 years since 1956, other tragic murders in Ormskirk have been solved. For example, the 1981 murder of an elderly shopkeeper by a teenager and a 2004 contract killing in the town. But the Ormesher case remains a stubborn mystery. Lancashire Police have reiterated that no unsolved murder is ever closed, and they remain committed to finding answers. There is still hope, however faint, that advances in forensic science might one day identify the killer who walked free. The immediate aftermath of the murders saw an outpouring of grief in Ormskirk. The Ormesher sisters had touched many lives through their little shop and their kindness. On Friday, May the 11th, 1956, 6 days after the murders, a joint funeral was held for Margaret and Mary. The event drew an unprecedented crowd and stands as one of the largest funerals in the town's history. Despite a cold rain that fell steadily that day, hundreds of people lined the streets to pay their respects. Two hearses carrying the sisters moved slowly from the hospital morgue through to the town centre of Ormskirk Parish Church. The surrounding roads were closed off as a mark of respect, while the town virtually came to a standstill. Bystanders bowed their heads under umbrellas, shops temporarily shut their doors, and mourners openly wept as the procession passed the spot so familiar to the sisters, including their own sweet shop on Church Street. Margaret and Mary Ormesher were laid to rest together side by side in the graveyard of the Ormskirk Parish Church. Fittingly, this final resting place is only a short distance from where their beloved shop once stood. At the graveside, friends and family spoke of the sisters' gentle nature and tragedy of their loss. Tributes poured in, emphasizing how good-hearted and inoffensive the two women were, truly innocent victims. In the weeks and months after, townsfolk took it upon themselves to ensure the sisters were not forgotten. For many years, the church sexton, Stanley Draper, tended the Ormesher grave, keeping it clean and adorned with flowers. It was said that Stan had known the ladies and felt it his duty to care for their plot, in an act of quiet remembrance. Even decades later, the Ormesher sisters are remembered in Ormskirk. The house, Ivy Dean on Asmall Lane, still stands. What was once the Brickmaker's Arms pub, and later the Ormesher family home, is now a private residence. Residents pass by, aware that the house walls hold dark history. In fact, shortly after the murders, the sisters' shop building on Church Street was demolished. It had already been condemned as unsafe, and by 1958 it was rebuilt, erasing the physical location but not the memory. Local history groups and true crime enthusiasts periodically publish retrospectives, especially on the notable anniversaries. The 60th anniversary in 2016 saw articles revisiting the case in local media and online blogs. The story has also been retold in documentaries, podcasts, and social media, often under the moniker of the Sweet Shop Murder, ensuring that new generations learn of the tale. For our part, we felt compelled to honour the sisters' memory as well. In preparing this story, we visited Mary and Margaret's grave in Ormskirk Parish Church to pay our respects. Standing before their joint headstone, now weathered by time, one can still clearly read their names and the tragic date, 5th of May, 1956. It's a sombre experience to see their resting place so close to the bustling town centre where they once cheerfully sold sweets and tobacco. The headstone serves as a reminder of Ormskirk's darkest mystery. As we placed flowers on their grave, we reflected on the injustice. Two kind, elderly sisters lived quietly and hurt no one, yet met a violent end in the one place they should have been the safest, their home. And to this day, their killer has never been brought to justice. The unsolved murder of the Ormesher sisters remains an open wound in Ormskirk's history. It's a case that highlights the fragility of even the most ordinary lives and how violence can intrude without warning. Margaret and Mary, Maggie and Polly, were two beloved women who should have enjoyed their later years in peace. Instead, on that last night in 1956, they faced something unimaginably cruel. The fact that their murderer walked free is a source of lingering frustration and sadness for many. Chief Superintendent Lindsay, the lead investigator, retired with the Ormesher case, the one blot on an otherwise perfect record. As he lamented, and as the town remembers, someone got away with the perfect crime, at least so far. However, the story isn't over yet. Police never forget a case like this. Advances in forensic science mean that cold evidence can sometimes yield new clues. That one bloody fingerprint still exists on file, and it remains the key that could unlock their mystery. All it would take is a match, perhaps from a descendant or a long archived print, and the puzzle pieces might fall into place. Lancashire police have stated that they remain committed to delivering closure and support for victims and their families. And while the killer's trail is ice cold after nearly 7 decades, history has seen colder cases solved. For the people of Ormskirk, the Ormesher sisters will never be just a faded story in an old newspaper. They are part of the town's soul. Generations have grown up hearing about the kindly ladies from the sweet shop and the unknown monster who did this to them. The case has become almost folklore at this point, a cautionary tale of rumour and greed, and a reminder of the importance of community vigilance. Yet at its heart, it's a very personal tragedy of two real women whose lives were taken. By retelling their story today, we honour Margaret and Mary's memory. We stand by their graves and hope that one day justice will catch up with the person responsible, even if only in name. Until then, the gravestone in Ormskirk Parish Churchyard stands as a silent testament to an unsolved murder, a mystery that still whispers through the cobbled streets and the old marketplaces of Ormskirk, asking who could have done such a thing and whether the truth will ever finally be known. If you made it this far, thank you. Stories like this deserve to be remembered with care, not buried under misinformation or forgotten over time. We'll be covering more cases just like this one, the ones that slipped through the cracks and the ones that will still haunt the towns that they happened in. So if you'd like to join us as we uncover more of them, consider subscribing and becoming one of our growing community. Until next time, stay curious, stay creepy. This is Case Unrested.